Daron, thank you very much for being here.
Hi, Mark.
Hello, great to see you. And we're delighted that we're going to be featuring a piece of yours on the KeyedUp Music Series program in February, a piece called Nocturne for Piano and Strings. And it's a first performance, a world premiere. And I have to say it's a piece I've wanted to program for a long time. But I think a piece like this needs a beautiful setting, music around it to feature the piece. And the first question I wanted to ask you is the theme of this program ended up being part of the 100th anniversary of David Diamond. I was actually applying for a grant that stipulated they preferred having a focus on David Diamond, and it sort of opened that up to me, and I found an interesting two-piano concerto that we're going to play. And I immediately thought of you because I know you studied with Diamond, and I thought maybe we could start today by if you had any thoughts about him or any memories, or if there's any kind of connection you make between your work and his.
Well, there are 5 very good and interesting questions in there, as always, and I'm intensely flattered that you're going to play the piece. You know, it was commissioned in 2000 by the school, by Bloomingdale School.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that. Are you still on the faculty?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was supposed to, I believe, be a concerto competition piece, perhaps.
I see.
Something like, I don't remember, but they didn't use it, or I don't remember what happened, but it made the piece come out. And I just wanted to put that out there and say 15 years is a long time to wait, and I'm thrilled that you're doing this, not because it was such a long wait, but because I had sort of despaired of that child ever having an opportunity to see if it had any feet to stand on. So thank you very much, Mark, for doing that. As for David, well, you know, I studied with David for 2 years at Juilliard after studying with Ned Rorem. Ned is, as we know, a master of small forms. David was a master of large-scale forms. And variation form was one that he was very fond of because he felt that it mapped the way that a composer thought. And I think that that's a great linkage with David, because David always used music. He used to say to me that I use fugues not just to create musical truths, but to weave my own sanity. Which I thought was pretty intense and pretty amazing. On the one hand, you've got someone, I think it was Cocteau, who said that a fugue is a cocktail party filled with madmen who agree with each other, or something along those lines. But I really believed in variation form and in fugue, and he gave me great love of both of those forms as compositional techniques. So that, I think, it's appropriate that this piece is on a program with David.
And I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to use the theme? I know you've mentioned in your program note about the piece that the material of the theme comes from.
Well, you know,
works.
This you're like playing more. You shall have played more of my pieces at once than anybody ever in my lifetime when you play this piece, because the theme of it comes from a romance that I wrote in 1991 as a wedding gift for Paul Moravec and Wendy Lamb. And I premiered it as a concerto. It was about 3 minutes shorter, and it was different, but the initial theme was the same. I premiered it with Leon Botstein in the ASO. And it was fun. So I know how your fingers are going to feel when you play it, which is really a nice feeling to have. But then, 7 years later, in 1998, I had this cool commission from the Madison Youth Orchestra, I think that's what they were called, for a piece called Lily's Purple Plastic Purse, based on the very famous Kevin Henke's kids book, and Hearst owned the rights to it, and they gave us the rights, and everything was fine. But then Kevin got a new editor at Hearst, and we lost the rights, and the theme, the counter theme for in the Nocturne, became the main theme for Lily's Purple Plastic Purse.
Oh,
and so that piece got shelved eternally because Hearst will never give the rights. So the Romance was withdrawn because it was an occasional piece. Lily was withdrawn because of lawyers. And then it became the Nocturne in 2000. Then, since Bloomingdale didn't do anything with it, I was writing a little one-act with Barbara Grecki, and it was called Broken Pieces. So I used the Nocturne theme as music on the radio that she was listening to while her bathroom was being fixed. And it became this really important pseudo 40s ballad that then came back in 2008 in the final of the 3 New York stories, of which Broken Pieces is the first, where there's a young married couple who have a baby. It's called Cradle Song, the third act, and it's my wife and me listening to it on the radio with our child asleep in the next room. So the theme that you're playing is all over the place, and there are all these echoes that will happen when you play those variations. So that's a long answer to your question.
Well, it's an interesting tapestry of material going from one piece to the other, and how it's a part of your musical life, and it's fascinating.
You know, you have so many composer friends, and I know that you've been known to be guilty of pushing a few notes around yourself, and I know that that this is the way composers think. You know, if you've got a good theme that is evocative, you can go in a lot of different directions with it, and there's nothing really self-referential about it. It's just like having a really good wrench, a spanner that works really great, and you really hold on to that wrench because it's a good one.
Right, it works, and you know it works.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you just a general question when you go about writing a piece like Nocturne. Do you map the piece out? Do you have a sense of the length? For instance, with variations, did you have a sense of how many variations, or does it evolve in your process?
I'm going to give you a very, very seemingly flippant answer, but it's not at all. I knew I kept making variations till I ran out of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had to get the parts done a couple of weeks before the premiere. I knew Paul and Wendy were getting married sometime after the premiere, but I knew I had to practice it, and I needed to get it done about 4 weeks in advance.
So that's the practical part of the musical life comes into the composition.
Yeah, so I had written the theme first and the last variation, the return, and that penultimate bridge. That was ready. It was sort of like making a counterpoint here. We're talking about David Diamond again. I knew the beginning, I knew the ending, I knew the penultimate, and I knew there would be a cadenza. And what you have written in the last couple of variations before the cadenza, or before the penultimate variation, really were more or less improvised. And it was old school. I gave Leon a fermata and said, I'm going to go ELP here for a while and see you on the other side, But then I worked something out when I finally, engraved it and revised it and gave it to Bloomingdale. I
just realized the other piece I played of yours was your piano variations.
Yes, which is pretty much the opposite of this piece, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Well, finally you get dessert.
Maybe we should do them together sometime.
Yeah, people
that
will
would be interesting.
Aesthetic whiplash. Or conversely, people will wonder, as they've wondered with me for 35 years, who the hell is this man? What I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Yes, I love questions.
You know, when you play something like this, which is very clearly uh, chamber music for friends, and written by a fellow. I mean, I'm not the pianist you were when you were 15, but by a fellow pianist. Does the music feel different than it does when you play the music of someone like David, who was a violinist?
To me, it does feel. I would say yes, because you can feel the piano. I don't know, the textures. You can feel the composer playing the piece. There is a kind of connection that's a little different. Not that I like better music by pianist composers, but it does feel different. It does.
I always love those stories about, you know, so and so studied with so and so, who studied with Leschetizky, who studied with Liszt, who studied with Beethoven, and so forth, and that you know that those Schnabel fingerings are Beethoven fingerings.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
That always moved me somehow. And so for me, another thing I always wanted to ask you was, well, when you play David Del Tredici's music, when you play four hands with David, his own music, does he give you fingerings sometimes?
Sometimes. Sometimes it'll be yes, particularly if like his music uses a lot of range. If there's something that I'm struggling with, which ends up being a lot of things, he'll say use. A lot of times it has to do with the thumb. You know, put the thumb in the middle, let the thumb sing. So there are some fingerings that are idiomatic to his music. Other than that, no, because I don't think he puts many fingerings himself. But some of the things that would seem awkward but open up with the right fingering.
Have you ever played any of those Otto Singer arrangements of Strauss operas?
Operas, yes, the Rosenkavalier.
Yeah.
Yes.
I always had a secret feeling that David's piano music was sort of like those Otto Singer things with all, you know, the violas and the thumbs.
Yes.
And I wondered if he played them as a kid, or whether that's just something that pianists who play a lot of romantic repertoire, as you do and as David does, know.
Funny you say it. I just heard Rosenkavalier on the radio. Last night.
Oh, the full orchestra.
Yeah, the full orchestration. And I was thinking of that idea of color and romanticism, very extreme romanticism. So on the piano, yes, it's really fascinating how different composers have their own feel. And when you're working with one composer, if you're focused on that composer, you start to get a sense of how it works. And each composer, as you know, is so different. Brahms from Schumann is so different. And just the way you can imagine that they were sitting at the piano, even their physicality. I don't know, there's something, there's a kind of connection there. And everyone's hand, everyone's technique is different. A strength of mine might be a challenge to someone else, and vice versa. And also music that speaks to your personality. It feels like, in your particular piece, I had only read about it, and then when you very graciously sent me the score, I sat down, and I fell in love with the piece.
Oh,
and then I knew, because it's a program of really pieces I love, and the David Diamond is a new piece for me. It's a very interesting piece. But that's when it sort of clicked, and I'm not saying it to flatter you. It's just a personal. If you feel that sense of love, then you find your path.
That's neat. You know, my son and I went up to Albany last weekend to hear the world premiere of Michael Torke's Piano Concerto.
Oh, wonderful.
David Allen Miller and the Albany Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the woman's name who played it. It was one of the the Van Cliburn people from a couple of years.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And she was marvelous. But I never really noticed how Michael loves to stab. He loves punchy 8-note chords. Ching tonk, ching tonk, ching tonk. It's like Messiaen without reverb.
I see.
And I said, oh my God, he was like that with Venata when he was 21, and now here we're in our 50s, and it's still the same composer. But I'd never really thought about what you were just talking about in terms of Brahms being very different from Schumann, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And then
the personality of the composer comes out. There are composers I've played. Well, of course, I never knew Brahms, but you get to know them through the music, really. Their idiosyncrasies.
Yeah. One last question for you, because I never get to talk to you, because here I am in the country now.
Beautiful country.
When you play Schubert, so many of the songs, I wonder if those weren't just guitar parts, weren't they, most of them?
Of the Schubert songs?
Yeah. Do you...
I don't believe... Maybe some of the folk songs. I don't know. I know some of the songs were written clearly for piano.
Yeah. Do you think of the fact that he was a guitarist of skill when you think about how he wrote, so many strumming accompaniments?
Oh, I see. No, I've never thought of that. I've never thought of that.
I don't know. Just I was curious. I love the fact that you latch onto that ephemeral feeling of connection. I mean, you called it love. Well, that's good enough for me. But the connection between the composer and the music. Can you expand on that a little bit? How does that express itself in this concert?
The connection of the composers and the music?
Yeah.
Well, it's a wonderful question, because some of the other composers on the program include Poulenc, who David Diamond, I know in some of my reading, was very connected to. And there are two pieces for two pianos that I played with Roberto Hidalgo, my colleague, who will play. The L'Embarquement pour Citer, which is really it's a valse musette that sort of combines a kind of bawdy French quality and then the elegance, and it's pure fun and delight, and then it's over. And then there's another piece called Elegy, which is that kind of the soul of Poulenc, a kind of dark, lonely soul. So the two pieces are kind of like the Florestan, Vesuvius, Poulenc. I never thought of it till now. So for me, that there's a connection, and I know he also talked about Gershwin, and we recently did the Percy Grainger fantasy on Porgy and Bess, which we're going to close the program with.
Everybody go home.
Everybody go home. It's going to be. There's a reason why we have reception after. It's plenty of wine.
That's wonderful.
And then I wanted to include, because I know of your deep connection with David Del Tredici, and he has a piece called "Late in the Game," which he subtitles "Long in the Tooth." Which started out as one piece and, of course, has morphed into something. And I've been sort of part of that process, sort of connecting these pieces. And these are not extroverted pieces. These are very interior pieces of Del Tredici, and it brings out kind of that quality of nostalgia and poignancy. It's a little bit different. There's a piece within it that's a little more Puck-like. David up to his little tricks, but in general, the music is actually kind of sad. I like that. It's something. It's like the elegy of Poulenc, and the diamond piece is. It's kind of like you were talking about the piano. Your piano variation. It's a more. I don't know how to put it. I guess it's sort of austere, kind of clearly influenced by the Stravinsky concerto. Just a really fascinating piece, but it's a piece you really have to kind of get into. It's an interpreter's piece. The material doesn't show itself right away. You have to find it. And because there's a lot of counterpoint, which I really love, as a player, I think it's important to keep it light, like Bach. And you can't get bogged down in the counterpoint. It has to breathe. So that's the challenge of that piece. And I think the Nocturne, your Nocturne is the soul of the program. There's always a piece that I think has that quality. It's like a movement in a piece. Sometimes there's just something. Dennis and I did a Chet Biscardi wonderful song cycle in the first concert.
I've seen some of. I saw. Did I see a performance of that from the festival from on YouTube? Is that?
It's possible. It was a beautiful performance, and we really worked at getting inside the piece. And Dennis is such a wonderful interpreter. But there's a song, "It's Time to Feel All Right Now," which for me is at the core. It's sort of the heart of the piece. But everything else is so important too. But I don't know. It's interesting. Sometimes it can be a phrase. It can be a moment in a piece that sort of brings you into that that deep place.
You know, when you put the two Davids, I must admit that I've never given a lot of thought to David Del Tredici and David Diamond in the same chapter. And it's suddenly all sorts of little bing, 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 bings are going off in my head because because I instinctively or reflexively look for, similarities between two things when they're together, and I think that what is it about the two Davids that is similar? And David's ability to court DDT's ability to court the obsessive in his use of sequence and to push the envelope, to push the extreme back in the day, really rivals David Diamond's pushing the edge of the envelope of complexity of counterpoint. So both are really boundary pushers, at least in my knowledge of what they've written and in how they're looked at by their colleagues. I mean, some people would say David Diamond's music was so contrapuntal, so incessantly that it became turgid and hard to listen to and all of this kind of stuff. And as the person who copied his flute concerto, at the time I would have told you you were absolutely right. But sitting in the audience, and as they cleared it out and as they began to command the piece, the hierarchy of Diamond's counter of the lines became clear, and then it was just it became obvious. And the same with Del Tredici. If you allow yourself to just ride on the superficial sequential nature of it, there is the obsessiveness, and you miss the darkness, the nuclear reactor that's driving both of them to push these extremes out. And I have always found with both men's music
and both men, that element of their artistry, that the ability to court the obsessive and express it in an aesthetic way, fascinating and super powerful.
It is.
It is. I hadn't thought about that, and now you've given me something, Mark, really to think and write about. It might be kind of fun. I don't know if David Del Tredici will like the article, because not every David Diamond is a hard, he's sort of a tough drink for many.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because of his personal behavior, but you asked at the very beginning. Maybe we can sort of bring this full circle. You asked, what I have any personal recollections of David. I think that one of the things that has over the years as I've gotten, older, that I've learned about David is he went off on me a couple of times and got very angry with me, and we made up and all of that, and I had to come to terms with the fact that David Diamond felt things so deeply that I think that his emotions could alter his memory of what happened. And I think that's for me, the last 5-6 years of his life, as we kept in touch, it helped me to understand why he behaved the way that he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that maybe that I can throw that out there as something that can be thought about as well as everything else.
Well, I think it's interesting, the obsessive quality you're talking about, and it actually helps for me to think about it, because that the two piano pieces excessively contrapuntal.
Yeah, and the late string quartets are the same deal. And it seems almost as though he is constructing more and more counterpoint between his heart and the audience, and creating more and more of an abstract artistic edifice, aesthetic edifice, in which he can function. I don't know. Some smart kid will write about it at some point. But I'm so looking forward to this concert. But because to hear you play these things and to make sense of them is going to be a great joy and privilege for me.
Well, thank you, Daron. I'm glad Dennis suggested a meeting like this, because I've learned a lot about the program and some of the interconnections, and I'm looking forward to the challenge of presenting it. It's all about the audience, making this music come alive. That's a great challenge for interpreters. And when you're dealing with composers that you know and work with, it's particularly exciting and gratifying.
Well, it's an honor to work with you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Daron. Thank you for your time.
See you at the concert.
Okay.